So after we get this step completed, your project is really going to look like shorts or pants because we're going to do the inner leg seam. Now, in an earlier step, you were supposed to press your side seams in one direction. And if you have done that correctly, then when you lay it out flat, the seam allowance should be on the right half of whatever side you're looking at. I happen to have the back facing up right now, but if I flip this over completely and lay it out flat, my seam allowance is still pressed towards the right-hand side. And that's because we want these pressed in opposite directions. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take a pin and pin through the seam allowance, or on the seam line right there. And then I want to pin through the one on the other piece. All right, so that they're right on top of each other. This is really important because we want those center seams to match. And now if we have them pressed correctly, one should be going one way and the other one should be going the other way. So the top is going to our right, and if we look, the bottom one is going to our left. So they're not stacked on top of each other. And I'm going to go ahead and put my pin in there. Then I want to come over here to the end and match up my two ends. Okay? And again, if I stitched this seam in the middle correctly, these two things should be the same length. Now, if you made two different size seams here in the middle, then they're not going to match up, and we may have to do a little bit of finessing. If that happens, you need to come talk to me. All right? The other thing that should match up are your notches. And I know some of you cut these off, so you may not have a notch to match, but do the best that you can. And then the other thing you need to see is this is actually not a straight line. And that's not because I cut it poorly. It's because it actually has a little bend there. It's not a big bend. That would be a very obtuse angle. But we do have a little bend there. And I'm going to put a pin close to that bend just to remind myself. And then I'm going to put a couple more pins in here. And I have 1/2 of the shorts leg pinned. Now, if you're doing pants, you got a much longer seam, but you're basically going to be doing the same thing. So let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 just on 1/2 of my shorts. Then I'm going to go to the other end, match those two things up, and make sure that these seams, the seam edges are right on top of each other. They need to be stacked up. All right, I'm going to try to match my notches. My notches aren't exactly perfect, but they're pretty close. I'm going to put another pin in here. And what I am going to do right now is I'm going to move this pin, instead of going straight through the seam allowance, I'm going to tilt it just a little bit at an angle. And that way I actually have it through that bottom seam allowance so that as I'm stitching along, my feed dogs aren't going to make that flip over, because we don't want that to happen. And then put a couple more pins in here, and we probably have about 9-ish, 10-ish, something like that. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So on this length of shorts, that's about what I'm going to have. You might have slightly more or slightly less, but don't put a ton of pins on here, because again, the more pins you put on, the more that you have to take out. Now our next step is going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We do need to remember there's a little bend here, and we're going to have to do a slight pivot. This actually isn't straight either, so we have to do a pivot here in the middle. And then when we get to this edge over here, we're also going to have to do a little bit of a pivot. So onto the sewing machine.